Welcome to the What is Smart podcast. We dive deep into the ever-evolving world of intelligence, learning, and success. Join us as we engage with leading educators, psychologists, technologists, and thinkers, unraveling insights and challenging old notions. From EQ to creativity, from tech savviness to social awareness, What is Smart is your guide to understanding intelligence in the 21st century. Let's change education together.
It's Garrett here for What is Smart. What is Smart is brought to you by the Gardens Foundation, www.thegardensfoundation.org. We are out there in the trenches of the war it is to change education at the policy level. We're talking for all kids across the country. And guys, it takes money. And as always at the beginning of the episode, the first question you're asking is, Garrett, are you hitting me up for money again? And the answer again is an honest yes, a little bit. I am sincerely hitting you up for a little bit of money so that we can take that and apply it directly to our first project, Global Pathways, sponsored with Johns Hopkins University. We're taking on how kids are assessed across the country, and you can be a part of it across the world. Simply by going to our website, we have merch, we have What is Smart logos on the t-shirts. It's a great conversation at parties to get started, and I'd love to hear their answers. But friends, let's get on with it today, okay? I have people in the background searching the internet, the world wide webs, the America Online. Yeah, that's right. If you're that old, I am. You're probably not. But we found amazing guests for you on this podcast, and today is no different. Today, I'm excited to have Lori McEwen right here with us in the studio. Lori's an influential figure in educational leadership, particularly known for her pivotal role in implementing the Portrait of the Graduate initiative, something that I'm super fascinated about, which broadens the definition of SMART by empathizing holistic development skills. Touching my heart. With over 25 years of experience across various educational roles, Lori brings invaluable insights into personalized learning and education system reform. Let's dive into this discussion and transformative educational practices and envision the future of learning with Lori. Lori, thank you so much for joining us here on the What is Smart podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Garrett. I'm really looking forward to this, I think, super important conversation. The question that is your podcast, right? That it's all about, I think, is core and at the crux of helping people to reimagine what that is really important. So
I think based on your work, Lori, that you're right in the wheelhouse of the work we do, not only at the Gardens Foundation, but with all of my businesses. But enough about me. Let's talk about you. And we always start the podcast with an origin story. Think about like X-Men #1. I said Avengers of Education in our little off-show conversation. Let's talk a little bit about how Lori got into education and then how you got into the new way. We're the Rebel Alliance, so I always think about it as you're being trained in the Force. So talk to us a little bit about how that took place.
All right. And feel free to give me a signal if I talk too much, because A, I do that, and B, I'm old. So I've been in the field for a long time. So it's a long story.
You're like, let's get the book out. Chapter 1.
Exactly. And I did understand that for the dialogue.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
We didn't have that.
That's hilarious.
So it really started for me in high school. I will tell you, when I was 17 years old, the quote that I put in my yearbook, or my ambition, you had the little section like what you want to be. And mine was to be a school superintendent. It was to have my doctorate, be married, have kids, have the house, and be a school superintendent.
I'm sorry to laugh. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm sorry to laugh because you are probably the only person that wrote that in their yearbook. Continue.
I think so. I think probably. And I'll tell you what that was about. I mean, one thing was I loved school. I loved school. I thought I was going to be an attorney. I'm also a first generation college student. So
very cool.
Didn't have examples in my family of people who had made the decision about college, made that decision about career. Their lives had happened to them in different ways. My parents were very young when they had me, so on and so forth. And so I loved school. I really loved the idea of being a lawyer, a trial attorney. I thought that'd be so exciting. And I thought to be a lawyer would be a great aspiration. And I only understood careers in terms of those like big roles. You could be a lawyer, a doctor,
A doctor,
so on and so
yep.
forth. I didn't, there was no entrepreneur, there was no consultant, it didn't occur to me. And anyway, I was sitting in my English class with the wonderful Mrs. Stock one day and realized, like, oh my gosh, this is bliss. I am sitting here learning with a person I love, talking with my fellow students. I get to read books. And I was like, I'll be an English teacher. I'll get to read and think all day long and talk. And won't that be exciting? And in my very, very, very small town and small high school, the superintendent's office was located in our building. And I knew him very well. You know, I had a class of 73 and his daughter was in my class. And so he walked in and I thought, oh, wait a minute. That is the seat of power. He makes everything happen in this school. And I was also really consumed with social justice. And you know, even though I lived in a small all-white community, I knew that there were students who didn't have opportunities. And I thought, I will be a superintendent. I will change all of those inequities by virtue of the role. And I will make everyone love learning the way I love learning. And so that was the path. And I stayed on that until I was 50. Moving forward, I was an assistant principal, I was an assistant superintendent, I was a chief academic officer. And as you may know from the world of education, the superintendent seat is not the seat where it all happens. When you talk about policy, right? We know that that is where it happens. And so my mom died, I turned 50. I had not been successful in a couple of attempts to be a superintendent. And each time I was relieved, realized I loved teaching and learning, and then decided to consult and pivot and do that. So I teach in graduate programs to help future leaders, and I consult with school districts. So I don't know if that was short enough, but that's the story.
No, that's perfect. And thank you so much for the context. I think, you know, one of the things we're fascinated about at the podcast is that we believe that it starts with understanding the future learner 20 years from now, meaning the reform of education. And then after that, most people go, okay, well, then now we know how to teach the child well. No, there's a missing link in that, which is professional development, which is consulting, which is what I think about as the cultural shift, you know, people like you that are actually empowering educators to understand how things like personalized learning and frameworks that are built around that support educators now and save them time. One of the things that I'd love to talk to you about today is the Portrait of the Graduate initiative. And it's, you know, from my understanding, attempt to redefining the term that we think so much about here, SMART. So talk to me a little bit about how that came into development.
So the Portrait of a Graduate, you know, there are organizations that work on this very specifically. Battelle for Kids is probably one of the biggest out there. But if you look back at the origin of how we got to a place of really wanting to define that, one of the places that I can find early is Tony Wagner, right? And Tony Wagner wrote about students, I think it was in Creating Innovators, but the 7 survival skills. And then he went on to revise those. And so the idea was, or is, businesses were saying, these students, successful as they may be on their transcript, aren't prepared. And that was cross-cutting industries. And they're just not prepared to innovate with us, to be adaptable, to think differently, transfer the skills and content that they seem to have mastered, again, by virtue of their transcript and their grades, but it's not translating for us. And so what is that about? And so you start thinking about what are the skills that really need to be emphasized, right? And so there's Tony Wagner, there was Ken Kay and the Partnership for 21st Century Skills. And we started thinking about the 4 C's. So you've got collaboration, communication, creative thinking, critical thinking. Along the way, folks have found others, you know, they'll talk about persistence, grit, CASTLE, the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning came in, right? With self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, relationship building, and dare I say social awareness, but they had 5 skills. And so, and Marzano talked about the habits that students needed to be successful. And I've actually done crosswalks and looked at those authors, those organizations, what they're putting forward. And they all seem to be around these skills that fall into buckets that AI are studied. And you look at the cognitive skills, the interpersonal skills, and the intrapersonal skills that students need to be successful. And when we can put those together, we can engage students in what the Hewlett Foundation calls deeper learning, right?
Beautiful.
The theory behind all of that is we've got this whole person, this whole child, going back to that language, who can not just successfully navigate school, and can and should, and there are pieces of content knowledge that are important, and there are foundational skills in each content area that are absolutely necessary to move forward to the next step in your learning.
Agreed.
And growing these other skills, the interpersonal and the intrapersonal, only help you with that cognitive skill and content knowledge development. So people just sort of, I think, I'm actually doing a research study on this right now, and I'm talking with a number of school districts to ask them the extent to which the portrait of a graduate has impacted classroom practices. And I'm getting all kinds of wonderful data about that. But what I can share is more than one of my participants has said that this is something they're seeing people, all stakeholders really get behind, because you can talk to parents and community members and ask them about the skills that they need to be successful in their careers and what they want to see developed in their students. You can talk to teachers, you can talk to school board members. And so I think there's a lot of traction behind it, because these are accessible ideas and important skills for all of us.
Yeah, and thank you so much for the context around that. I think for me, I'm wondering, how important do you think it is for that co-created learning is how I think about it, right? If you're speaking with stakeholders locally, how important do you think, and how micro locally do you think that we should be defining that across the country? Because I think one of the things that we're driving towards in our research is this: it's not about creating this huge kind of macro policy. It's much more about creating a metacognition, or a framework, if you will, to approach understanding what localities want for preparedness for life. Because it's different in a rural inner city, more so inner city Louisiana, than it would be for where I do the podcast out of, which is Loudoun County, Virginia, the most, the richest county in the country. So how important do you think it is, and how localized do you think it needs to be?
By the way, I do work with Loudoun County, and have for a little while through part of
very cool
the Virginia is for Learners Innovation Network, and I think it just became Virginia is for Leaders Innovation Network, with a company
very cool
that I work with called ALP.
So we'll limit our conversation around Loudoun County Public Schools specifically, and go a lot more macro. But anyway, continue.
Yeah. Exactly. But I think I would say I get cautious about going too micro local, because there is research behind some of these skills. So the McKinsey Foundation has put forward 54 foundational skills, and they've put them into 4 quadrants, and they've got the cognitive, the interpersonal. They call it self-leadership. I would call it intrapersonal, and they've added a digital component. And I would argue that if you look at those 54 foundational skills, and if you look at Wagner's survival skills and his reiteration, so on and so forth, these are cross-cutting skills. And while you may have a county, a community, a school district, a small rural versus an urban saying, we really want to prioritize some or others of these are the skills that are necessary for all of our children to be successful. And as I've worked on my this research study, I've compiled in a huge spreadsheet the competencies of hundreds of districts across the country, and I can keep going. And we're seeing the same thing. We're seeing the Partnership for 21st Century Skills. We're seeing the 4 C's. And then again, we see some other things come up. So you might have a place where we're finding our students give up too easily. We've got a high dropout rate. That district or county or town might want to really emphasize resilience and grit and perseverance because they're seeing a lack of it. Well, that's an important skill in any other area, but we might just want to bring it to the forefront in one place or another. But what I've seen is that most of these profiles look very, very similar, and that is for good reason, because these are skills that are valuable for all of us, and this has been borne out by research. So when I help districts to create one, we look at the research and we look at examples from other places. And then the community comes together and says, well, we like that. We might want to tweak it a little bit here. We might want to tweak the definition. We might want to tweak the where we're going to see it, or where we'd like to look for it, or how we'd like to develop it. We might tweak the students' I can statements, but we're not, they're not wildly different from place to place, and nor do I think they should be.
Yeah, that's the only challenge I think I see when it comes to quantifying social emotional growth, character trait growth, kind of the soft skills that we're talking about. My dream is to have the report card flipped. It's like you said, like there are foundational skills that need to be scaffolded in education to then build upon things like critical thinking and logic. Mm-hmm. But I also know that, our system at a macro is all pretty much focused on quantitative data, right? Like they need numbers and grade letters. And the challenge with, quantifying social emotional growth is it's much more narrative focused, much more gray area, right? And so when you have these programs where we're focusing on, let's say we need more resilience or grit in our curriculum, how much of a roadblock do you see happening when you're still pinging what we know learners need to have against a rock solid system of beef letters that we give kids to quantify their education?
Well, we're coming up against barriers, definitely, but I don't think they're insurmountable.
I love it.
Seen in the
I love the courage.
Right. Well, and I want to be very respectful of people who are concerned that a focus on some of these skills might feel a little too soft. And I'm talking parents especially, and potentially especially parents of students who might themselves be the first who are going to go on to college.
That's right. Hey guys, a little side note here. This perspective that Lori mentions is one that I have to give kudos for again, because it's one that I did not think about. And it's so true. There's kind of a prestige that comes with college that I know for my family alone. I mean, thinking about how important it is for a parent for their child to go to college because no one has ever gone in their family. So very interesting point, Lori. And continue.
First to move forward out of a specific area or into a specific career. Those folks want to make sure that that we are still respectful of the currency that still matters in certain parts of the world. And so it is a delicate balance to work on these hybrids around how do we make sure that we are ensuring that your child has the necessary content knowledge to move forward. We do not want our students, right, to go to college feeling like they've been successful because of the way we have tried to quantify some of these other skills, and find that they have to go to remedial math classes, which is happening all over the country, right? And so we're not going to get rid of data analysis, and we're not going to throw out some standardized assessments, which have gone through the test of time to show that they are valid and reliable instruments that show us how well a student understands certain foundational concepts and skills that he or she will need to go forward in chemistry, physics, mathematics, so on and so forth. some of those that are, I think, more easily quantifiable. However, to answer your question, what I'm seeing is a lot of districts are moving towards being more thoughtful in their assessment systems, right? Being more thoughtful about project-based learning, for example. And then now how we translate that into grades, that can be difficult, but places like Mastery Transcript Consortium and other places like that, they're helping us think through how we can reframe grades and reporting and giving feedback on what students know and are able to do without maybe torpedoing their chance of getting into some universities that maybe haven't thought about this the same way. And time out as an aside, I have spoken to universities and admissions counselors who say, listen, we can understand any transcript. So a little bit is being stuck in an old system. A little bit is really understanding the reality of what is out there and wanting to be respectful towards students. I don't know if I took us on a different road.
No, I just like always challenging the mindset, right? I think that and I think it's a beautiful thing because maybe you're a little bit more embedded in public school systems, have a little bit more faith than someone like me who, but I think both are needed, right? Like I'm the guy bubbling up and boiling mad that it's taken this long, whereas you're on the ground seeing what's happening in real time. And I do believe that, the world is getting to a place now with things like AI informing it, where the relevancy of a Rockefeller-informed education system is becoming less and less and less. And yeah. I do see those barriers that I speak to in the beginning kind of fizzling down a little bit. And even COVID forced educators to try new things, to get comfortable with technology. Technology is allowing us to have this conversation today. There are meaningful ways that technology can support learners in the classroom. And so that pivots to my next question, right, for you is being a consultant to public schools, working on these initiatives that you're working on, where does tech play its role in the overall framework that you help to deliver within schools?
So I will tell you that on the ground, it is not playing as strong of a role as I think it can or should. And I will say that I'm probably guilty of not helping to support that. So when I do the work around Portrait of a Graduate, we work on getting those skills identified, figuring out where they can exist in the curriculum. And then we start making some instructional shifts. And those do include attention to the digital component or how we might use AI, although I'm no expert there. One of the greatest tools that we have, I think, at our disposal, and full disclosure, the research study I'm doing is with this gentleman, but Scott McLeod and Julie Graber developed something called the 4 Shifts Protocol years ago. And one of the shifts is on how individual teachers or groups of teachers in lesson plans and unit plans can more thoughtfully integrate technology into the work that they do. And that is a way to personalize learning for students. And we personalize learning for students so that they can develop the skills and attributes that are identified in the Portrait of a Graduate. The blocks that I see around truly using technology to personalize, when we're talking about like anytime, anywhere learning, when we're talking about letting students go at their own pace, right? Which should technically be available to us. It should technically be available that,
well said.
Right? That a student can not fulfill the requirements of 4th grade mastery in math or science, but have fulfilled them for ELA and can be moving forward in ELA while getting the additional support, right? So we saw that with like the Summit Schools model, right? Now, a couple of things are the barriers there. One is the traditional schedule. So if I go back to some of your earlier, comments about you being piping mad, anybody who knows me who watches this be like, but Lori's piping mad and Lori's a cynic. And I'm usually dropping lots of very foul language into these
Ditto.
conversations, right? But especially because of the study that I'm doing, and the people I've been talking to most
Sure.
recently, and the people I work with, I am heartened that there is a group of people willing to do that. But if we go back to what hasn't changed, those traditional structures, the hours, the Carnegie unit, the time on task. You know, when I was in the chief academic officer in Providence Public Schools here in Rhode Island,
Very cool.
we created 2 small personalized mastery learning high schools. One of the things that we needed to do was work with the state on policies and waivers around attendance and seat time and hours. And so when you go to policy, those things do need to change to make it possible for schools to create schedules and systems that will allow students to move at their own pace. Summer break, we have to get rid of. We just have the notion that does not mean that I don't want kids outside at summer. Love it. But the idea that, you know, we've got the 180 days and we're starting and stopping the agrarian calendar, like those things, these are vestiges of our traditional system that get in the way of using technology to that full extent. In the classroom, however, we are seeing teachers who may not be going to full personalization, but are using technology for engagement, for ease, for efficiency. But I do think we've got a long way to go there.
That I think we do too. And I think part of that is, as you mentioned, this cadence, right? This rhythm of how we structure learning environments with the proper toolkit and then empower educators to know what tools to use in certain situations. And so I kind of want to put a situation out there and get your thoughts on it. Is, you know, we talk a lot about soft skills. We talk a lot about how, you know, research is now mapping very clearly to the necessity of soft skills in future preparedness in industry, as you mentioned before, across the board. You know, I think we put a lot of focus on empowering our learners to try and build those skills when we know in the research that the best way to do it is to have those adults in these children's lives embodying those practices in real life on example for children. So what are your thoughts on putting the majority of the effort towards educators and professional development, and not just professional development where you have someone talking at you, but professional development that's designed to kind of go alongside with you in a personalized approach to then see that within the classroom? What are your thoughts on that type of environment? Do you think that we put too much on the learner and not enough on the educator? And then how would you see that rolling out in schools?
It's so funny that you say that, because yes, I 100% agree. And it's one of the things that I've talked about with the Portrait of a Graduate, and I've written about and talked about, is this idea that even with the Portrait of a Graduate, and I know we're talking about a whole bunch of other elements, but the Portrait of a Graduate encompasses that, right? If students are adaptable, then they are digitally literate. You cannot be adaptable and ready and innovative for the world that we live in if you are not digitally literate and fluent. So these things all go together. And one of the things that we do is we map, you know, the skills under the big attributes. But I say, you know, taking a Portrait of a Graduate, creating one, putting it up on the wall, and I've seen people do it, and it's so pretty. Oh my gosh, the colors, and they have wordsmith. It's not just a collaborator, but it's an empathetic collaborator. It's so lovely. They've got everything in there, and it's on every wall, and you can see it going in. But nothing's happening in the classrooms, right? And the idea is, well, we said we want this for kids, and if they look at it enough by osmosis, they'll have it, without saying, no, we really have to support teachers in curriculum development. If we're handing them curriculum materials, and many states are requiring, right, that we're using these high quality curricular materials, if those are not aligned to the Portrait of a Graduate attributes, if I can't see how I can engage my students in collaboration, digital or otherwise, in a classroom within the curriculum that's been shared with me, within the unit plans, within the assessment opportunities. I have to now go overlay that, but I was never maybe a collaborator because I work in a room with a door that closes.
Right.
Nobody comes to see me. There's no co-teaching. There's no peer observations. And quite frankly, when you do come in, I'm getting very nervous about what that means for me because the hierarchical nature of schools, we have sometimes very qualified principals walking in and giving wonderfully targeted and supportive feedback. And then we have principals who don't necessarily know what to look for and don't give the right feedback. And so we have anxious people. People become very anxious about collaboration. And so you're right that the effort should go to teachers, but then we go to funding and policy because teachers do not have the time for meaningful professional development. If you look at most calendars, and I've not taken a close enough look, but if you look at a student's 180-day school year, you may have teachers who have 182 or 183 days in their contract. And I come from a very heavy union state.
Right.
There is one district in my state that I think has 190-day. A charter that I worked for had much longer. Our teachers started in August, but even that, as we know from the literature, is not the best PD. 4
Right.
weeks in August without children in front of us is not the same as job embedded professional development with clear and protected time for collaborative planning, both vertical and horizontal, all the stuff that DO4 has been talking about forever. Without that, I don't know how we get teachers to feel like they are embracing the portrait for themselves, that it is also a portrait of an educator, or it is a portrait of a learner, and we are all learners. And so they need that PD. We know from the research that teacher prep is just not cutting it. And that is sad, but true. It is just, there are some universities that are doing a very good job, but for the most part, they are just not making the grade, right? I think the National Center for Teacher Quality would bear that out.
Would very much agree.
Right? And they've given recommendations forever. And those can be informed by policy, right? By, whatever assessment we're using for certification, through our state level evaluation systems, which often then trickle down into teacher prep. But then we also know that principals are feeling underprepared and underdeveloped.
That's right.
So, and a lot of this is post-COVID. And so I think there is a lot of work to be done to give people the time and support. And then, of course, I do think teachers are underpaid.
Oh, yeah. I mean, at scale, I mean, any teacher, really. I'm trying to think of an area in which, even in private education, it's less almost because you have a less benefits package, right, for a lot of these small businesses and things. But I think you're right. I think, culture in a school, let's talk about just one school, right? And even more so as we kind of scaffold up in leadership. Culture in a school, if you want to define it or I always think about it as provide loose boundaries for culture and allow for your learners to explore and your educators to explore those boundaries culturally. But it's, from what I find, so important to find kind of the Mount Rushmore of people of your school, of your district, and really embed those values, involve those values with those people, and allow that to trickle down. Meanwhile, putting the professional development like we speak of into play. But I think it's so important, the problem that you call out, which is a lot of this is known. A lot of this, how can we get these traits to be, showing up in schools? I kind of think about the positivity project in K through 12, right? Especially in elementary schools. You have a project that's intentions are so beautiful to celebrate these character traits, these moral values, but being implemented, as you kind of called out as well, in a way that isn't embedded. It's a assembly once a month.
Yes.
And like you said, if you put up in front of their faces enough. Well, let's be real. We're against a society that's attention span is slowly declining, and we're asking them to stay sedentary again and listen to us talk about empathy and compassion and grit and all, and maybe have a character that represents it. It seems super, super outdated. So I think somewhat of a solution, because I'm not only problem driven, I think we're both kind of in this place of, we're not going to let this problem go by and just be another complicit person. I do see part of the solution being this kind of cool factor, right? And I'd love to hear your perspective on this. Is I haven't seen a push in, pop culture. I haven't seen a push for a change, a reform in education. You have all of these issues in our country right now that are getting a lot of volume. The thing that's never given a lot of volume is education. What are your thoughts on, not only a pop cultural movement on this, but then your part in that?
And the movement to sort of put a focus on schools, or make the profession cool, hot, sexy, something
Exactly.
we're talking about, maybe get people into it. God, if I had an answer to that, I don't know that we'd be doing this podcast. I'd be out doing it right now. I think, there are some people who are trying. I think about Ted Dintersmith, right? And his documentary, Most Likely to Succeed. There's another great video I just found called First Class, I think it is, about a sort of a place that's sort of similar to High Tech High.
Have you heard of Prince EA? Prince EA's stuff. He talks about if you give a man a fish, and then it's really well done. It's that kind of stuff that will really hit culture. But I'll definitely send it to you after the podcast.
Okay.
Really moving stuff in a way that hits home.
Yeah. Well, and I know of Prince EA, but have not seen. So I'll look forward to seeing that from you. But when you talk about making it cool, I think what we need to do is make it exciting for people to go into the profession. And one of there's money. Money is huge. I think signing bonuses would be,
Amen.
Right, something great. There are a lot of states that are having to do that for hard to staff areas, because I'm sorry, if I've got a degree in physics, which clearly I don't.
Fair.
I was an English teacher. We were a dime a dozen. I was lucky to get the $13,000 for my first year. It was part-time, but I think,
Ugh, yeah,
but that's okay. I went up to full-time, made 22,000. So woo.
Oh, I know, killing it.
Right. No, but I have children who are both just recent college grads. My son just got his MBA, and he's
Awesome.
making more out the gate than many teachers who are veteran teachers, and he's might be making more than what some people can top out at their salary scale. And so that is so important, and I don't have an answer to that. I also though wonder about things like what else school could look like, what else are the psychic rewards that you get that aren't just from the teacher as hero, kind of the movies. When I teach my grad students, especially my aspiring principals, and we talk about the movies that have influenced them, they're talking about Dead Poets Society, and they're talking
Dangerous
about,
Minds. Yeah.
Yes. And actually somebody brought up To Sir with Love in my most recent class. I was like,
Oh, wow.
He's nowhere near as old as me to know it. But these are all the hero teacher, this idea that it's one teacher who changes the lives and the trajectories of all these students. And teachers are heroic, and they do that. But really, we can and should be working in collaboration. And so, I don't know, if that will make things cool. I've been watching Abbott Elementary, and I love it. But again, Abbott Elementary, it's like, I see, kids in desks. I see one teacher per classroom. I'm not seeing teachers doing instructional rounds, or teachers, doing peer observations, or I don't see them in common planning time. But I do see people really getting joy from the work. And I think, for Quinta Bronson to have made that show, I think she did it because her mother is an educator in urban environment. something like that might make it might put some focus on it. But then to get more political, hey, look, where we are politically. And
I just think we're so worried about the wrong things because, well, and we need to be worried about some of those things, right? But more so, I keep thinking about this Franklin Roosevelt quote of like, we can't always prepare the world for our children, but we can prepare our children for the world.
Yeah.
And I think that's honestly where we're missing the mark is, we're so clouded. And I say we as this collective, we more so the United States, but we're so clouded in all of these other things that understanding that building up a future, our children, literally the future now, will help to solve what I look at as almost all of the problems that we currently have if we do it right. And it's people like you out there pushing this mission forward, pissed off at times, saying the curse words, saying those things at parties that are helping shift that movement forward. And as we think about, I like to think about a podcast as a good drive home. And as we kind of wrap up, because I know that we could talk forever and ever and ever about all of these things. And I look forward to maybe a future where we do have the opportunity. We ask all of our guests on the show our title question. Remember, there's no right answer, but it's something that you're very much familiar with. So I ask you, Lori, what is SMART?
So I think SMART in a nutshell is being able to find solutions to vexing problems, your own and the communities, right? And I would say that, I will sometimes poo-poo traditional grades or, having a valedictorian, salutatorian, which is not at all to insinuate that I don't think that having amassed a great deal of content knowledge, having, graduated with honors, worked hard, whether it's high school or college, that gives you, I think, a great foundation to solve those problems, right? So it's not, it's not that when we talk about the soft skills or we talk about the portrait of graduate competencies that we've been talking about, and we talk about grades, I don't know that they're an either or standardized tests or the SAT or the LSAT or the MCAT. They're not an either or. I would like to know that my physician did really well on the MCAT and did really well in his or her courses in high school, pre-med, med school, whatever. But I also know that there are some very gifted people who did very poorly in those areas because of the way our schools are set up. So, I think about people in any field, right? A chef who can say, how am I going to turn this dish that everyone's eaten before? Everybody has a piece of steak. How am I going to get more people to come into our restaurant and enjoy this? What intelligence does he or she have to know what tastes go together and what will appeal to folks and how to price it at his or her restaurant? The person who is fixing your car is smart in 1,000 different ways. If my hairstylist can manage to make me look good, that's his gift and his genius and his smart. And so we all have it. And so I think it is like, how do you find solutions to vexing problems? How do you do that with joy, right? But it's not about necessarily the work that comes quick or easy. It is really how do you stick with it and solve things that matter. My hair and my hairdresser may not be the thing that matters, but it matters to me. So
there you go. I mean, I don't think it could have been better said. I think with all of that, of what you said, I definitely think we'll see a decline if that is addressed, right? If we can figure out quantification of this collective SMART, we'll see a decline in mental health issues. We'll see a decline. We'll see better prepared, more well children overall, because there's so much about what we currently quantify as SMART on the macro that puts kids into these places of feeling less than. So That being said, thank you so much, Lori. We really appreciate you coming on the show today. Our listeners and viewers, I'm sure, are so much going to appreciate your perspective. And that being said, where can they find your latest work? Where can they hire you to get out there and start helping them change the way education looks and feels on the ground level?
Thank you. So my website is lorimcEwen.com, www.lorimcewen.com. And there I have contact information. You can also contact me at lorimcEwen.com. I'm on LinkedIn at Lori McEwen, and occasionally on other social media sites, but I think that's the best place to find me. And if folks go to my website, they'll find a workbook, a way to get started to think about implementing the Portrait of a Graduate, gives a few compelling questions that might help teams get started, and then they can book a consultation with me and we'll see if I can help.
It's important, guys, get out there and contact Lori and start that process, because if you're stuck, if you feel like in your small town somewhere, in your school district, things need to change, they can. The frameworks are there. It's about connecting with folks just like Lori. So from the Gardens Foundation and from the What is Smart podcast, thank you so much for listening. We truly appreciate all of your ears, all of your attention to this issue. Spread the word, share the podcast, listen, listen, listen. Thank you again. We'll see you next time on What is Smart.